Any configuration that you do is only going to start from the moment that you switch it on, from the moment you configure the settings and so on. So that data is not going to be collected if you haven't switched it on, but also it's not going to be presented in a way that's going to be meaningful to you or useful to you if you haven't configured it.
Brilliant. Well, it's really lovely to have you here, Agata. Really pleased to be able to speak to you. I wanted to introduce everybody here today to Agata, who runs Business Ahead. And we've worked together in the past couple of years, haven't we, in relation to looking deep down into Google Analytics. I think when we first met, you were working for a big multinational firm, managing their international spread of websites that all fed into one Google Analytics property. And one of the reasons I really wanted to speak to you today, particularly whilst we're still in AMEC's measurement month as well, is to speak to you about some of the changes that happened a few months ago in relation to Google Analytics. There was a big change, and hopefully most people were prepared for that change and got a contractor or a specialist involved to ensure that their Google Analytics was switched over. I think this is the right way to call it, switched over to Google Analytics 4. If you haven't done this already, if you've just snuck into Google Analytics like I did a few weeks ago for one of my clients and noticed that everything had changed, then I think you may need to speak to Agata to just help you get your head around things. And I think that was the purpose of today's session, is to talk specifically about the metrics that I use within Google Analytics 4 to help demonstrate the impact that communications can have on organizational outcomes. And hopefully you'll talk to me about sort of how we go find that information that we used to know where it used to sit in Google Analytics 3. So welcome, Agata. Thanks ever so much for joining me today.
Hi, Steph. It's really nice to catch up, and I know that we've worked together on a few projects before, and we've known each other for several years now, I think. As you said, when we first met each other, I was working at an international company running their digital analytics. And really, since then, I've been helping clients to optimize their Google Analytics and to really help their teams also understand how Google Analytics works and how they can utilize it in their work. And so this is really what I focus on in my work. When you reached out and said, okay, I've got all these PR firms that are a little bit curious about this migration that happened earlier in the year, and what to do about it, how to find the metrics that they were used to in Universal Analytics. I thought that was a great idea. So thank you so much for having me. When it comes to the GA4 migration, you mentioned the word switch over, but it was probably a little bit bigger than that, actually. So it was quite a fundamental change, actually. It was earlier in July this year that the cutoff was supposed to happen. The data was still tracking for quite a few websites for a few months after that. But eventually it all stopped. So now everybody has to be using Google Analytics 4, and there is certainly still a lot of businesses who are a bit confused about how it all works.
How involved was that process? I'm calling it switching over as if it was a flick of a button, but does that involve quite a lot of work at a specialist end to make one set of information look at another? How involved is that process? How long does it take for you to make that happen?
Well, the change is quite fundamental. Basically, you have to configure everything from scratch. And, you can take the easy route to just install the tracking code and just push the data in, and you're going to see some data. But obviously, that is very often not going to be particularly helpful and particularly useful when you're actually trying to optimize your metrics, optimize your websites, conversion rates, and so on. So really, you have to fundamentally rethink how you structure your web analytics data, how you structure your reports, because the data foundation is very different. So to give you an example of what I mean by that data foundation, in Universal Analytics, we had different scopes, for example, session scope and hit scope, which corresponded to page views. And all that data was quite separate. It was a bit difficult to correlate that data with each other. So you had to either analyze users or sessions or events, but it was a little bit difficult to put it all together. In Google Analytics 4, everything is a hit, essentially. And then some of these hits can then be aggregated into users, essentially. A convention of session really is based around hits anyway. So what you really look at in Google Analytics 4 is events, and that essentially allows you to really look at different behaviors that users have on your website and correlate them to one another. And that includes page views, that includes the different clicks that they had on the website, and also how their behavior connected to each other over a period of longer time across many different sessions, not just within a single one.
I've always wondered about the difference between the sessions and the page views. Obviously, the users I understood to be sort of on an individual basis, but it's probably a similar concept to in our media analysis speak when we talk about the difference between reach and impressions. Impressions often counts the same person twice, whether they may have been exposed to something in one place or another. So that's very useful. Okay. What would you say to a brand if they haven't switched over yet to Google Analytics 4 then? In a sense, is it likely that any hits that they might have had to their website since the summer of 2023 might not have been being tracked anywhere in any kind of data depository?
Yes, that's right, because Universal Analytics by now it would have stopped tracking any data. So if you haven't switched to or turned that data on in Google Analytics 4, then essentially you're not collecting any data anymore. Your Universal Analytics data is still going to be there. If you have a free account, it's going to be available for another until July 2024. But after that, even that data is going to go away. So you're going to be left with no current data and also no past data as well. And yeah, you should definitely, at least, at the very, very least, turn it on so that you have an idea of the number of users. But if you haven't configured it, probably it's not going to be that useful, to be honest. You do need to configure it.
And once you do switch over to Google Analytics 4, does it bring into it that historic data piece, or is it necessary to kind of export all of your past data now to be able to make year-on-year comparisons going forwards? Is that a complex issue, looking at the decades worth of data that's just gone?
Yeah, any configuration that you do is only going to start from the moment that you switch it on, from the moment you configure the settings and so on. So it's really good to really do your configuration as soon as possible, because that data is not going to be collected if you haven't switched it on. But also it's not going to be presented in a way that's going to be meaningful to you or useful to you if you haven't configured it. So yeah, any settings that you apply are not really going to apply historically.
Okay, well, warning to everybody, if you're logging into Google Analytics for a first time in perhaps say 3 or 6 months, you were warned probably for some time beforehand, because many in our industry were talking about it. But this is that wake up call to everybody to really get going with it. I shared with you some of the metrics within Google Analytics that I specifically focus on to demonstrate outcomes and impact from communications and public relations, because I know there's so much that one can gather from Google Analytics perspective, and you might be working with an e-commerce brand that's looking to make actual financial transactions on a website and so on. But with many of the organizations I work with, it's all about using that Google Analytics data to demonstrate some of the kind of outside outcomes that may come from communication. So that could be communications can often lead to audiences wanting to go and find out more information from a particular brand or an organization. So hits to a website, and particularly how people come to a website, perhaps if they come to a website from social media, can be demonstrative of an outcome or an impact of communications activity. So we did spend some time just talking through the 3 or 4 or 5 metrics that I focus on from a PR measurement point of view. And I suppose the first one that I focus on is organic and referral traffic. And I was wondering, have you got any comments or thoughts as to how things might be different than what we should be wary of in terms of Google Analytics for?
Yes, so in the past, you might have used things like your acquisition reports to look at things like session and medium and channel grouping. So these would be like the main dimensions that you would look at in Universal Analytics. And in Google Analytics 4, you will see similar terms, but there will be a little bit of a confusion, because there is actually 3 variants of each of these dimensions available in Google Analytics 4. So the 3 different variants are based on scope, and there is the user scope, the session scope, and the event scope that are available for each of these dimensions. So let me show you an example of what it looks like in the actual report. So in here, you can see the demo account of the Google Merchandise Shop. This is a demo account that Google makes available to anybody who just wants to do a bit of practice on Google Analytics 4 data. So you can always have a look in here and see what's available, just to try out filters and reports and so on. And what I wanted to show here related to the organic and referral traffic that you were asking about is reports related to traffic acquisition. And it's quite useful when it comes to tracking the immediate impact of any campaigns or any kind of activity that they are pushing on their websites at the time. And you can see that the dimension over here is called Session Default Channel Group. And then if you click the drop-down menu, you've got the opportunity to select a different type of dimension. You will see that all of them start with the word session. And that is very indicative of the fact that all of these dimensions are related to that particular session. So that means that within that particular visit of the user, how do they enter the website just within that particular session? So you can also change it to source medium, and this is going to be session source medium.
But I don't recognise from before then. I see something called cross network, and that's not something I've seen before.
Yes, there's a bunch of new channels that have been added in Google Analytics 4 that were not there before. And so yeah, there is much more granularity, which is pretty helpful, and especially what a lot of people are finding useful is the split of social traffic into, for example, organic social and paid social, because very often these are very different channels that have different divisions of a business working on them. So yeah, it's very, very helpful to split some of these.
And that's what we see here at the top. The first 2 for this particular screenshot we've got, well, the story is number 2 and 3, where it says Google Organic, Google CPC, cost per click, I imagine, is that differentiation between the organic and the paid.
Yeah, so these ones are kind of what was there before. The differentiation between organic and paid was there before, but the paid usually related to just the adverts. But now we also have paid social, paid ads, and so on, and all of these are available in Google Analytics 4 in a much more granular way, essentially. But yeah, if you're interested in particular in organic and referral, essentially you'd look at the medium of organic and the medium of referral, and you can use the filter over here to filter the data by that. So you could put in referral here to only show referral traffic, and you can see which websites directed people to your website.
That's a useful view. I will often glance through that view and try and explore if any of those URLs look like they may be effectively the names of magazines or newspapers, and that might then demonstrate if there was a link in that earned media piece, whether clicks came through to the website. I don't see any in the top 10 just here particularly, but it's not that kind of client, I guess. Okay, thank you.
So I think for your PR clients, probably the traffic acquisition might be a good one, a good type of scope to look at. And with that come a range of metrics, and some of them you might be familiar with, some of them might be a little bit new. One metric that I would say is probably the most important is the conversions metric. And this is something that doesn't come with Google Analytics out of the box. It definitely needs to be configured. So you really need to have to consider what events you're going to mark as conversions in Google Analytics for. And if you're not familiar with, well, you're probably familiar with the word conversions, but maybe not in the context of Google Analytics. Conversions is basically a new name for what used to be goals in Universal Analytics. And a conversion is always an event that you tag as a conversion in addition to being just an event.
So that doesn't necessarily have to involve a financial transaction necessarily. It's not always limited to it being an e-commerce site and you're selling product. It could be that your conversion or your end goal, once a user comes to your site, perhaps to a blog post, is that you want them to go somewhere else within the site. And the act of them clicking from one place to another effectively would be a completed conversion. Am I understanding that right?
Yes, you could set that up as a conversion for sure. Although probably you don't really need to mark that as a conversion, because there are other signals available in Google Analytics that will help you measure that engagement level that you're talking about there. Conversions is more about specific activities that you want users to perform on your website. So what are the true goals of your website? And usually it wouldn't be just a person clicking through from one page to the next.
Or it could be, say, a download of a PDF gated behind some.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
And you can see when I clicked on that drop down here under conversions, you can see which events have been tagged as conversions in that particular account. And there is the purchase one at the top. So that is quite common, especially if you have an e-commerce setup. But you've got all sorts of other events that are also tagged as conversions. And you can also see that even events such as view cart, here they tag them as conversions because they are particularly important. So it doesn't necessarily have to be the ultimate end goal of your website, but it could be a micro conversion as well that is going to be tagged as a conversion. And then you can filter these views over here to see how many different referrals directed people to a specific conversion or goal that you had for your website.
Okay, that's brilliant. I see something here called engagement rate. Can you explain anything more about that?
Yes. So engagement rate is also a new metric in Google Analytics 4. And really it replaces bounce rate. Initially, when Google Analytics 4 was launched, there was no bounce rate at all. There was just the engagement rate. And in essence, it's like the flip side of the bounce rate. Engagement rate measures how many sessions were engaged sessions and what's the rate of these engaged sessions compared to all of the sessions. So an engaged session is one where one of three things happen. And the user either visited at least 2 pages on your website, maybe they had a conversion event, or they spent at least 10 seconds on your website. So if one of these 3 things happen, then you've got an engaged session, and then you can see engagement rate.
So you're looking for the engagement rate to be high, whereas with the bounce rates, you're looking for the bounce rates to be lower.
Exactly.
That's a different way of viewing the numbers. Okay.
Yeah, so it's the opposite. And what's quite funny and interesting that happened a bit later after G4 was initially launched is that there was so many comments about bounce rate. I think it was one of the more popular metrics, right, in universal analytics. So a lot of people are just so confused. Where's the bounce rate? What do I do without my bounce rate? And I think when people were starting to get used to not having the bounce rate, then they said, okay, there's your bounce rate. And then they reintroduced the bounce rate, causing probably even more confusion, because now the bounce rate was essentially calculated as the opposite of engagement rate, which was not actually the same as the bounce rate you would see in universal analytics. And at the time, people still had the data in universal analytics and in G4. So when they would look at the 2 side by side, it would never look the same. So there was probably even more confusion than before they reintroduced it.
And there are some other similar metrics to what I used to see before. So, for example, average engagement time per session, engaged sessions per user. That's probably a little bit more qualified than what we saw before, because it's got the word engaged in front of it. So it will have had to have perhaps met one of those 3 criteria that you explained before. But I do think that this can also be a useful metric, particularly perhaps not looking at it in this particular view with the traffic acquisition view, but you might want to look at, for example, landing pages, i.e. where does a user come into a website and how long do they stay on that particular page? And if you've got particularly interesting content, the likelihood is that they're going to stay on that page for longer than average. And that demonstrates that your content, your blog post perhaps was engaging, sticky, made them stick around on the website. Similarly, I guess events per session is a bit like probably what pages per session were previously, and you're looking to no, it's probably different then, because it's not going to be the same as pages per session, but you are looking for that number to be higher because it's demonstrating people are looking or doing things elsewhere, either on that page or clicking through to another part of the site.
So events per session might not necessarily be as useful of a metric as you would like it to be. Very often, I actually customize a lot of these tables for them because they can be a little bit confusing. There is so many metrics in this table. It might be a little bit difficult to figure out what exactly should I be looking for. And actually, one of the cool things about Google Analytics 4 is the fact that you can really customize these default views of reports. You can customize practically everything you see in here. You can customize the names of these reports, what these reports are, how they are kind of nested down and grouped together. And you can also customize which metrics you're shown in here. So events per session is one of these metrics that I would usually just remove from that view because it's not particularly helpful. You also have things like engagement rate, which is much more meaningful than events per session. You've got average engagement time per session. That is also much more meaningful than events per session. And engagement time is also a new metric in Google Analytics 4 that basically gives you a much more accurate view of how much time people actually spent browsing through your website and browsing through your pages, rather than just simply loading the page and then forgetting about it when it lives somewhere in a tab that you're no longer looking at. So engagement time.
I've always wondered what happens when you keep a tab open. I've got various tabs open on my phone that I think have been open for about 3 months, and I always wonder when it stops counting that I'm there. But it's probably switched me off. Okay, that's really, really useful. So in a sense, pages per session is no longer there by default, but as you say, it might, that's a view you could probably set up and bring in should that be necessary.
Yeah.
And what I love, and another reason why I love looking and delving deeply into Google Analytics is the fact that, especially when we're talking about earned media, the impact of communications, the written word, and how we compare, let's say, media coverage against advertising, is things like the average engagement time per session, because as humans, we tend not to engage with paid advertising for a significant amount of time. Even the longest adverts on TV sometimes might be a minute long if they're a really long John Lewis advert at Christmas time, but most adverts are 30 seconds long. But look at this, we've consistently got over a minute, a couple of minutes. And so I think that's one of the key things that people that do work in PR should consider and talk about a little bit more, is this focus on the attention time, the quality minutes that you may be getting with your audience with this type of content, as opposed to perhaps other types of content that might have some paid spend behind it. So it's a metric I always like to highlight. Okay, there's some other metrics that are particularly interesting as well. There's probably some new stuff around engagement. In fact, I see engagement is just there under the tab for traffic acquisition. Mm-hmm. Can you tell me more about what we can see in that engagement tab? You've spoken through perhaps some of the new metrics around engagement rate, but is there anything else we should know about that's new in that engagement section?
For your particular clients and contacts in the world of PR, landing pages are probably one of the elements that are going to be of interest. And you can look at these landing pages from the traffic acquisition report as that secondary dimension, or you can flip it around and go to the landing page report and then add that secondary dimension of source and medium. So how I like to use this report is to add this secondary dimension, source, medium, and then you'll see you've got first user, source, medium, session, source, medium. So let's just stick with the session, source, medium as we have been discussing earlier. And
I'm really pleased, Agata, that you've told me about this Google Merch Shop practice demo account, because again, that's gold dust piece of information for me. Sometimes we don't have access to our clients' Google Analytics when one wants to teach our colleagues, but this is just really useful to know. Thank you.
Yes, it's really handy for situations like this when you just have to show how things work and not necessarily want to be showing some clients' data at the same time.
No, it's brilliant. And another page another view that I often find interesting when looking at Google Analytics is exploring the search console element, which would give some guidance as to how people came to the site and which queries they put into Google to land at the site. I see Search Console is still down there on the left-hand side. Can you tell me anything that you've spotted that might be different or worth considering in relation to Search Console? And do you use that view yourself when working with clients?
So when it comes to Search Console, it's really great that Google Analytics 4 has this integration made between the two platforms. Actually, you can see which queries were used to get to your website. And then you can obviously drill down into here, into countries, device categories, or stick with the query. And you also have another report that's available here. And essentially, this one just shows you the landing pages that were accessed by people who landed on your website from the Google search engine. And it's helpful because it gives you that information about engagement levels based on these landing pages from Google's organic search. But if you want to kind of combine queries and landing pages and impressions and that kind of stuff, you have to still use the Search Console. So it's definitely not a replacement. It's an addition and like another facet of looking at your data. And if you log into your Google Analytics account, you might not necessarily see this Search Console section over here. It's very easy to switch that on, actually. So if you have edit access within your account, you will see a link here that says library. And in the library, this is where you would customize that view. And this is actually something that is pre-configured, and you just have to switch it on.
That can be really helpful. I know many clients, they might be working in a business to business space. They might have issued a report or something. That report might have a slight name of its own, and it may be useful to find out that people are specifically putting the name of that report into Google to get to your website. And it's things like Search Console that can help demonstrate how that report was misdescribed or misunderstood or misspelled or things like that. So that can really help with iterating and adapting PR strategies and messaging when needed. So that's really useful. I'm sort of going full circle and reminding myself of that huge multinational client that you worked on before we worked on together, and having to join all of their various company websites into one individual property, and being able to see that global view across all of their different localized sites. What can you tell me about that kind of geographic view that we were so used to looking at within the old Google Analytics style? Is there anything that we should be wary of or consider when looking at which part of the world people come to our organization site from?
Yeah, so when it comes to clients who have that international presence and have different types of activities and different types of content across different regions. So with these types of users, you can definitely look at things like your demographic details report, where you can see data by country and so on. And you've got your basic engagement metrics by country. And obviously then you can choose between different types of demographic data. But if you are interested in any particular reports that are somewhere else where we've already looked at, so for example, the landing pages report or the traffic acquisition report, it's good to use the feature called comparison. And it's essentially a little bit like segments in Universal Analytics. So in here, you can select country, and you can select, for example, exactly matches, and let's say United Kingdom, and you can make a comparison that's based on users in the United Kingdom.
So you could compare behaviours by people in the United Kingdom against the rest of the world and say people from this market are more likely or less likely to do this action or that action, or you can compare UK versus US or whatever other market it might be. Okay, interesting.
Yes, that's right. Or if you're not interested in comparison, you just want to see a filtered view, you can remove the all users comparison from here, and then you're just looking at United Kingdom in all of these reports. And there's a helpful toggle that allows you to hide or show these comparisons as well, and also as you move in between the different reports. So that is quite a nice little feature as well. And yeah, Google Analytics 4 keeps adding these additional features all the time, and it's really great to see the platform continue to grow and continue to develop. And yeah, initially when it launched, there was definitely a lot of hesitation around Google Analytics 4, but I think more and more people are getting around to the idea of using it as their primary web analytics tool, which is great.
I guess that's just human nature, isn't it? We get so used to knowing exactly where everything fits, and it happens with every. I know this is more than just an interface redesign. There's an element of architecture that's gone on deep behind it, that's obviously been part of the improvements, but it's just human nature that we don't like it when buttons change and buttons move and fonts are different. But overall, have you found that this new Google Analytics functionality, once you get used to it and once you know where everything is that you perhaps were once looking for, and once you've worked out where all these new things are that perhaps might make your reporting even better, are you overall positive about what's happened in the few months since this switch over? Has it made you busier as a consultant, I guess, because more people have had to get you in to support them with the transition? But how are you feeling about the future in terms of what Google Analytics can do for organizations?
Yeah, I'm very excited, and I like the new platform. Initially, I was also a little bit hesitant, but now, as I've been using it more and more, I really enjoy it. But there is still a little bit of that situation where you really do have to have the right configuration. It's not just about learning how to navigate the platform, unfortunately. Because it's more flexible than Universal Analytics, it allows for that customization. That means that really you are kind of forced to customize it, and you can't really use it out of the box as well as you could do it with Universal Analytics. So a lot of the work that I do with clients, and yes, it has been quite a busy period, I have to say. It's been to do with creating that structure, creating that architecture of how that data should work. And a lot of companies are trying to basically replicate what they had in Universal Analytics, for example, with that event structure where you had 3 attributes to every event, category, action, and label. Now in Google Analytics 4, you have up to 50 different parameters that you can apply to every single event. So that allows you so much more flexibility. It's such a limitation if you're trying to just migrate that 3 hierarchy of events into Google Analytics 4. You should really embrace these additional features and really think through how you're going to use it, how you're going to define your different data points, how you're going to basically establish your data governance within your business, because that really helps to make that data meaningful, make that data useful when you're then trying to analyze it.
No, I really appreciate that, Agata. I ultimately got that sense when I popped into Google Analytics 4 the other day. I could see that it was all different. I could see that it probably was going to be better once. I could see it needed customization, and there were fewer of those kind of already existing tabs and views available there. So no, I really appreciate the fact that I've got you at the end of the phone to support me whenever I come along and see something different in Google Analytics that's never not quite working for me. And I do encourage others to reach out to you, if they haven't made the switch over yet. With each day that passes, you're not knowing who's coming to your website, and it's such useful information to be able to explore why organizations are achieving the successes, or perhaps actually hits to their website could be a sign of a crisis or something else. So it's really important to know about that. But it's really great that you've explained the importance of getting that sort of architecture, that switch over and that setup right from the start, and getting somebody involved that really knows what they're doing, and to support you with that handover piece to be able to continue the longevity and that year-on-year comparison aspect to people's reporting. But just to have an expert there to support you, I think, is really crucial. So I really thank you, Agata, for sharing your knowledge today and sharing it with some of our community here in the PR measurement world. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. I always enjoy our catch-ups, and it was really lovely to speak to you again. And I'm sure we'll catch up again soon.
Thank you, Agata. Cheers.